kingdoms. Those two tribes are really representative of those kingdoms. They're the leading tribes. Judah, certainly in the south, that's definitely clear. In fact, the southern kingdom is often just called the kingdom of Judah, even though it includes other tribes, such as Benjamin, and actually Simeon is there in the middle, which we'll mention in a moment. And then there's some Levites there, and then in the north, really, Joseph's tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, dominate the northern part of Israel. I mean, if you think of Manasseh, they have basically two sections, and they're huge. So they have both a plot in the land, but also outside the land, east of the Jordan. So that's why we focused on them. That's why the book of Joshua focuses on them. They're important tribes. So it's not that the rest aren't important, but they don't receive as much attention. So we'll look at the allotment of the remainder of the land in chapter 18 and 19, and then we will look at basically the cities for the Levites, which is chapters 20 and 21, particularly the cities of refuge, which is tied with the Levites, and then chapter 21 is cities for the Levites. So let's dive in. Chapter 18, verse 1, it tells us that then the whole congregation of the sons of Israel assembled themselves at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there, and the land was subdued before them. So the land is subdued. They're trying to allot the rest of the land. Says the whole congregation. So Israel is assembled there, and they're in Shiloh, which is in Ephraim. We know that from chapter 16, verse 6. And Shiloh becomes a primary center of Israelite worship prior to Jerusalem. And so this is seen, we'll actually see this in several passages throughout Judges, Joshua, the end of Joshua here. We see it here. Shiloh is also mentioned in verses 8 through 10 of chapter 18. Verse 10, for example, Joshua cast lots for them in Shiloh before the Lord. So this is basically like the center place of Israel for the time being. It'll later become Jerusalem. But we'll also see this in Judges and even in 1 Samuel. So just know Shiloh is kind of this central place. You can, if you have a map, it's there in Ephraim, and so Ephraim's pretty central in the Promised Land. So it makes sense. Jerusalem is pretty central as well, but it's a little further south. Okay, but you can keep that in mind when we're getting to some of those later books, which they'll mention Shiloh. But okay. So while the land was subdued, 7 of the tribes still had not received their inheritance because they put off taking possession of the land. That's what verse 2 and 3 says, because Joshua speaks to the sons of Israel, and he says, "How long will you put off entering to take possession of the land which the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you?" And then he says, "Provide for yourselves 3 men from each tribe, that I may send them, and that they may arise and walk through the land, and write a description of it according to their inheritance, then they shall return to me." He's asking them to draw a map. In fact, some translations will just call it a map in some of these verses. So go through and draw a map of the land, and we'll we'll divide it up. So that's what they do. We see that in verses 4 through 7. Though there is some instruction here where it says in verse 5, they shall divide it into 7 portions. Judah shall stay in its territory on the south, and the house of Joseph shall stay in their territory on the north. And so you can see those tribes are already set, and in fact they're spoken of even here as like the northern and southern tribes. So again, that's the whole thing I was saying, the representative of the kingdoms, what becomes later the divided kingdom. So they cast lots before the Lord, and he apportions the land to the remaining tribes. And we see in chapter 18, verse 11 through 28, the first lot comes out to Benjamin. So that's where we're going to see. We're just going through the 7 tribes here, remaining tribes, and the allotment to their land. We see in verse 11, it says, Now the lot of the tribe of the sons of Benjamin came up according to their families. The territory of their lot lay between the sons of Judah and the sons of Joseph. So Benjamin is fairly central. If you have a map, I know mine's very small, so I'm hesitant to put it up here, but I'll do it anyway. So instead of me drawing it. So you see Benjamin gets pretty southern land next to Judah, and that's going to be they're going to join with the southern kingdom there. So if you didn't bring your maps, that's on you. I think all of you should have one. So and if you don't, you have them in your Bibles. If you have a Bible that has them, they usually do, and they usually have the maps of the allotment of land. So it's a pretty common map. Okay. So the city of Jerusalem, we look at verse 28, we see it says, mentions there Jerusalem, the Jebusite, that is Jerusalem. So it's interesting because Jerusalem's in Benjamin, but it's also in Judah, so it's on the border, is what we learned there. Jerusalem's on the border. So if you look at your maps, that's generally the case there. So. Okay, although my map isn't colored, and so I can't see very well the borders. Okay, but it's on the border there. All right, so that's Benjamin. I'm not going to highlight anything else because these have a lot of difficult names, and it's just giving the borders. So we'll just kind of fly through some of this. Okay, second lot comes to Simeon. This is starts chapter 19, so we're already in chapter 19. We didn't spend much time on 18. That's all right. So verse 1 through 9 of chapter 19 is Simeon. Interestingly, no boundaries are given for Simeon. It just lists the cities. But we do, and I think the reason is because it's in the middle of Judah. So that's part of the reason for that. Look at verse 1 and 9. It says, we'll look at verse 1 first. Then the second lot fell to Simeon, to this tribe of the sons of Simeon, according to their families, and their inheritance was in the midst of the inheritance of the sons of Judah. So that's the language it tells us. They're in the middle of Judah. They don't get these separate boundaries. They're just there in the middle of Judah. Verse 9 says something similar. The inheritance of the sons of Simeon was taken from the portion of the sons of Judah. For the share of the sons of Judah was too large for them, so the sons of Simeon received an inheritance in the midst of Judah's inheritance. So they just get it right there in the middle, and part of the explanation is that Judah had too much land, which they did have a pretty big territory. So it made sense that Simeon was there. And so part of this too, though, when you think later on when the kingdom's divided, and Judah encompasses the southern kingdom, usually it's just said Judah and Benjamin. And I don't recall them mentioning Simeon much, but Simeon's there in the middle of Judah, so Simeon's just going along with Judah. So really when you think of the southern kingdom, it does include Simeon. I mentioned this last time, but we'll go back there just to make this point. Genesis 49:7. So this is in accordance with Jacob's prophecy. Genesis 49:7. When Jacob or Israel was blessing his sons, and he was referring to Simeon and Levi, and this plays out even for Levi as well. I'll just read the whole section, starting Genesis 49, verse 5. Simeon and Levi are brothers, their swords are implements of violence. Let my soul not enter into their counsel. Let not my glory be united with their assembly. Because in their anger they slew men, and in their self-will they lamed oxen. So that's referring to them killing, is it Shechem, all of the relatives of the man who violated Dinah, their sister. And then verse 7, cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will disperse them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So that describes both Simeon and Levi. Simeon ends up in the middle of Judah, and the Levites end up scattered throughout. So you could say of both of them, neither of them have borders. Both of them just have cities in Israel. So I know when we draw the map, you look at the maps, and Simeon gets this circle territory there. But really, they just have cities. They're just there in the middle of Judah. So that's pretty cool to see the prophecy there fulfilled. But things go a little bit better for Levi because Levi gets the priesthood because in their violence they also slaughter all of the idolaters in Exodus 32 through 34, the golden calf incident. And that's when they're given the priesthood. So Simeon is never given the priesthood, they're just violent. But the Levites are violent priests, so that's, they can kill animals and that kind of thing. So that's how I see it. Take their anger out on the animals. Okay. So that's Simeon. Third lot, Zebulun. This is verse 10 through 16. And their boundaries and allotment are specified. I don't think I have anything to say on Zebulun. They have Bethlehem, verse 15. If I can flip over here. They get Bethlehem. Okay. But this is pretty typical. You read in, whether it's Jacob's blessings or here, some of these tribes just don't get a lot of attention. So it's just the way it is. There's not too much information on them. They're mentioned, but not a whole lot. Okay, then fourth lot comes to Issachar, and the boundaries of the allotment were specified along with the list of the cities. So you see that in verse 17 through 23. So same thing. I don't have a lot to say there. And then Asher, same thing. Fifth lot came to Asher. The boundaries of the allotment were specified there in its cities, verse 24 through 31. They're in northwest Canaan. So if you have a map, Asher is the very northwest. And in fact, they're supposed to have Tyre, which would be, they would have the land of what's now Lebanon, what was then Tyre and Sidon. So, Phoenician, that's what I was looking for, the Phoenicians. So, they have furthest northwest, and Zebulun's there kind of in the middle in the north. And what else did we look at? Issachar, there also the east, middle east, northeast, middle. So, okay, and then finally, Naphtali, verse 32 to 39, their boundaries, and then also their list of cities. One interesting thing I'll note here, this is somewhat of a textual issue. A lot of times people focus on the textual criticism. There's differences between some of the New Testament manuscripts, and so you'll hear like the King James and New King James are based on more Byzantine texts compared to the other translations, which are more the majority text. I don't want to get into all that, but I will note in the Old Testament you have different problems because our Old Testament translation is mostly based on what's called the Masoretic text, which is the text preserved by the Masoretes, and it even has the vowels under the Hebrew letters, and so there's debate over whether those were inspired or those were just added later, and can you revocalize words occasionally. I don't want to get into all of that, but I want to at least mention here, when you look at chapter 19, verse 34, it says, it says there at the bottom of that, and it reached, it's referring to the border, and it reached to Zebulun on the south and touched Asher on the west and to Judah at the Jordan toward the east. And it's a little odd because, like, well, how does Naphtali touch the Jordan, touch Judah? Because you can see, if you have a map, you can see how Naphtali touches the Sea of Galilee, but Judah is way south. And so, you read this and like, well, that doesn't make sense. So there's a couple possibilities here. So literally, verse 34 says, the border, quote, by Judah, the Jordan east of the sun. So it's referring to the east. So the Greek translation in the Old Testament, now there's various manuscripts even there, but the Septuagint, which I refer to occasionally, is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. The Septuagint omits the word Judah, and so does the Vulgate, the Latin Vulgate, but that was probably because of the Septuagint. So then that raises the question, well, which one is correct? Did the Masoretes get this wrong? Did they accidentally add this word Judah? Is it a textual corruption? Some translations do go that route and they just leave it out. But I looked up the Syriac, which is another Semitic language. It's a form of Aramaic. Actually agrees with the Masoretic text, so it has the word Judah in there. So that raises just challenges. If Judah is correct, I was thinking about this, and I couldn't find a lot in the commentary, so I'm just going to give you my thought. If it is correct, the options, one commentary said that Judah must have been an unknown city near the Jordan. So it's possible. There could have been a city called Judah near the Jordan there in the north. Another thing I thought about is it's possible this referred to water rights. I was thinking maybe because Judah's down there in the south, but remember Judah borders the Dead Sea, and you have the river, the Jordan River going all the way down. So I thought maybe it's referring to Judah as far as Naphtali being at the top there. They get water rights all the way down. I don't know, possibility. I like to think about water rights sometimes. I don't know if you're interested in that, but these things are a problem in the West, especially, right? Maybe not New Mexico. Arizona has a huge problem there. You always have to negotiate who gets access to the rivers and these kind of things. So, aquifers. Okay, so that's a possibility. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. So I never just assume that the text is wrong. I mean, I know that's sometimes with the scholars. Oh, the Masoretic text must have got it wrong. Let's just go with the Septuagint. Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it's just a hard passage and you just didn't think about it enough, or you don't know. You just don't know. Okay, you just don't understand. And sometimes we don't understand things about the Bible. It's okay. There's little details. We're like, yeah, we don't know where the city was. Okay, that's fine. It happens. Okay. So that was the sixth lot, Naphtali. The seventh comes to Dan. So this is kind of interesting. So Dan is verse 40 through 48. Because 49 through 51 has some different stuff in there. So we have the boundaries of the allotment to Dan, which is specified as between Judah and Joseph. Okay, so let's look there, verse 40 through 48. Verse 47, well, I'll read some of this, starting in verse 47. The territory of the sons of Dan proceeded beyond them. We'll ask, what does that mean? We'll come back. For the sons of Dan went up and fought with Leshem and captured it. Then they struck it with the edge of the sword and possessed it and settled in it. And they called Leshem Dan after the name of Dan, their father. Okay, so if you have a map, so this is interesting. Maybe I'll draw. I'm just going to do very loose lines here. Maybe I should have come in early and done a detailed map for you all. That would have been very impressive, but not what I was planning on. Okay, so if this is the land, so this is interesting. So this is the Mediterranean there, and then we'll say that this is the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan running through. So what's interesting is you have Judah down here, and Dan is supposed to be right here. Okay, so this is supposed to be Dan. But they don't end up there. In fact, look again at verse 47. The territory of the sons of Dan proceeded beyond them. So it's saying that they failed to conquer the city. In fact, we see this Judges 1. If we go to Judges 1:34, it says, Then the Amorites forced the sons of Dan into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down to the valley. So it's saying the territory, back to Joshua, the territory proceeded beyond them, and then it says they had to fight and capture Leshem. That's verse 47. So they went up and fought with Leshem and captured it. They struck it with the edge of the sword and possessed it and settled in it. And they called Leshem Dan after the name of Dan their father. Now elsewhere this city is called Laish. That's Judges 18:29. So Laish, but guess where this land is? It's actually above the Sea of Galilee. Something maybe it's a little too high there. So if we have the Sea of Galilee here, and then Leshem is, or the city of Dan, is all the way up here. So it's Dan or Leshem. So that's a little odd. So they don't end up where they are supposed to be. They end up all the way in the north. And in fact, this explains why later you have that phrase. You probably recall it. It comes up a number of times in the Old Testament where it's from Dan to Beersheba. It's referring to the whole length of Israel. Well, that's because Dan ended up all the way in the north, the furthest north possible. You have Mount Hermon north of that, and then this is Bashan. So they're actually this is a region of Bashan. They're in East Manasseh. So very odd. And it's just that one little verse there. So it's good to catch that. So, and then of course Dan, they don't fare too well later on, right? When we get to the book of Judges, they basically go apostate when we get to Judges 18. So, yeah, that's a bad mark on them, even just here. Okay. Now, some scholars assert that the city lists here in Judges, Joshua, confused the two. Some scholars assert that the city lists here in Joshua were added by editors long after the time of Joshua, right? That's what critical scholars are going to do. They're always going to say crazy stuff that is super liberal. But there's even arguments against that claim. For example, Ekron is listed in the allotment to Dan in verse 43, even though there's no evidence Dan ever conquered that city. It was a Philistine city. Judah had temporary victory over in it in Judges 1:18. So, that's good evidence that these things were just actually allotted early on, and that the list is correct. But we see this was the allotment to Dan, and they didn't take the land. Of course, they weren't the only tribe not to drive out the peoples of the land. You have other places, chapter 19, just something I'll mention. Chapter 19, verse 15, for example, it mentions, and this happens in several spots, it mentions the total number of cities allotted in some places, but it doesn't actually list all the cities. So for example, in verse, what did I say, verse 15, chapter 19, verse 15, it says 12 cities and their villages, but I don't think it lists 12 cities. But that's okay. So critical scholars would say, look, those are errors. It doesn't have this. It doesn't have. It's not a big deal. So it didn't list all of them. Okay, but there were 12 cities. So it's just, in a sense, it's an incomplete record. But that's okay. It's not. I don't think that's a problem. And I mentioned this before, but many of the cities listed are not mentioned anywhere else in the Old Testament, which I think is further evidence that this was a record from the time of Joshua. It's an early record. Some of these cities didn't get settled, at all, maybe, or not well, and things changed, and then they never get heard from again. Okay, look at verse 50, 49. Let's read 49, 50. When they finished apportioning the land for the inheritance by its borders, the sons of Israel gave an inheritance in their midst to Joshua the son of Nun. So they give Joshua his land, finally. He's the last one to get it before the Levites. In accordance with the command of the Lord, they gave him the city for which he asked, Timnath-Serah in the hill country of Ephraim. So he built the city and settled in it. And it makes sense because he was from the tribe of Ephraim. So he was a son of Joseph, a descendant of Joseph, Joshua that was. Which that also makes sense. And remember, Caleb is from the tribe of Judah. So again, we have those tribes being prominent, Joseph and Judah. So Joshua builds the city and lives in it. And so when you think about it, the two spies, right? There were two spies, at this point 45 years earlier, based on Caleb's testimony. 45 years earlier, these two spies were faithful to the Lord in evaluating the land of Canaan. That goes all the way back to Numbers 13. 12 spies, one from each tribe, are sent into the land. Only 2 are faithful, Joshua and Caleb. And because they said, hey, they trust the Lord. And they say, hey, let's go and take the land. And they then receive the first and last portion of the inheritance of the promised land. Right? Caleb gets his land first. Then you have the rest of the allotment. And now finally we finish up, with the exception of the Levites, we finish up and Joshua gets his city as well. So, I think when you think of the big picture, yeah, there's a lot of failure of the tribes in between to drive out the Canaanites, but we also see bookends of God's blessing, right? Caleb and Joshua, faithful men of the Lord, and they both get their cities. The Lord was good to them. They were good to the Lord, and the Lord was good to them. And then this concludes the division of the land. Let's read verse 51. These are the inheritances which Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun and the heads of the households of the tribes of the sons of Israel distributed by lot in Shiloh before the Lord at the doorway of the tent of meeting. So they finished dividing the land. So it's kind of a summary conclusion statement ending that section, though we have a little more with the Levites here. But so this all happened. The Lord was the one who distributed by lot, whatever that involved. The Lord assigned these lands, and this happened at Shiloh and before the tent of meeting at the doorway there. So Eleazar, the high priest, and Joshua were getting this information from God. Okay, any thoughts or questions before we pick up with chapter 20 on the cities of refuge? Try.
What do the commentaries say about why do the scriptures have so much specificity on these borders?
I think, well, I don't know. Maybe just one takeaway from it, though, is it shows just the specificity of the Bible in general. It's a very detailed book. It's not just general claims. We will get to the verse at the end here of chapter 21 where it says, the Lord fulfilled all of his promises, just as he had said, right? Not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass. Everything God prophesied, said he would do, he foretold, his promises come to pass. And that includes the division of the land, even just down to the very, borders and cities. Though I'm not sure, this is new, right? The allotment, but it wasn't necessarily promised. You'll have this exact border, other than the whole land of Canaan. But I think it just shows the specificity of the scriptures, and it's a historical book. The Bible is a historical book. Not just a history book, but it is a history book. So it's the most detailed records we have of the ancient Near East by far, right? I mean, otherwise you're they're relying on various manuscripts or inscriptions and the like that are not extensive like this. Nobody preserved their history like the Jews. Okay, any other thoughts or questions? All right, let's go into chapter 20. So now we're done with the allotment of the land. It's all set, but some cities need to be appointed here. So we have the Lord speaking to Joshua in verse 1, and he says, verse 2, chapter 20, verse 2, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, designate the cities of refuge, of which I spoke to you through Moses. And we have an explanation, verse 3, that the manslayer who kills any person unintentionally without premeditation may flee there, and they shall become your refuge from the avenger of blood. So, we've seen this before in some passages. Exodus chapter 21:13 speaks of manslaughter. This is especially in Numbers 35. and then some in Deuteronomy 4, verse 41 through 43, and chapter 19 of Deuteronomy. We're not going to look at all those, but I'll just note this, that this is related to the sixth commandment, because the sixth commandment, you get different versions. Thou shalt, I'm going to go with the old. Thou shalt not what? Well, that's debated. How do you translate it? It's either kill or murder. Because we don't really have a word in between in English. So most modern translations go with murder, right? You shall not murder. The problem with that is it leaves out manslaughter. Manslaughter is actually forbidden by the sixth commandment, because manslaughter is a result of negligence. It could be recklessness, which is it's even worse. You're even more, it's extra negligent, gross negligence. But negligence is just carelessness. You had a duty and you didn't do it. You should have secured the axe head a little more, and it flew off and it killed somebody. Yeah, I mean, that's bad, right? I mean, you didn't intentionally do it, but you still broke the sixth commandment. So, it's good to parse that out. So the Hebrew word there is ratzak, and that's why I said it includes unjustified intentional killing, which would be murder. Murder's unjustified intentional killing. You intend to kill someone, and you don't have a reason to do it. I mean, it's not self-defense. Okay, that's the basic explanation. But the sixth commandment also includes unintentional negligent killing. That's manslaughter. Now, we still have these even in modern American law, stemming from the British common law. We have these concepts: murder, manslaughter. If you're driving your car and you're drunk and you kill someone, that's usually, vehicular manslaughter. They have terms for this. You were negligent or grossly negligent, and so you can still go to prison for those, right? That's still bad, but it's not murder. Murder requires intent. You intended to kill someone. In fact, we have that language here, verse 3. This is my translation for the cities of refuge, where for the manslayer, which it defines as, quote, one who kills a person by mistake without knowledge. That's my translation. But by mistake without knowledge. So it's not intentional, and it wasn't premeditated. That would be the knowledge. That's more of a modern word, but if you premeditate, you plan a murder, and then you intend to kill that specific person. We won't get into this, but Numbers 35 actually it elaborates on these distinctions between murder and manslaughter. So you can go look at that. Numbers 35, verse 16 through 21 is on murder, and Numbers 35, verse 22 through 29 is on manslaughter. And only one gets the death penalty, right? Murder gets the death penalty because, you intended to kill someone, and so part of, I think, the logic is you're not fit to live in this world, and you're a danger to society, so you should be killed by the state. But when it comes to manslaughter, you're not trying to kill somebody. You're just, maybe foolish, or you just made a mistake. I mean, it could happen to anyone, but it's not good. It usually involves some sort of sin. Okay. So, when it comes to these cities, the manslayer is to flee to a city of refuge. And the reason is, somebody might still come after him, right? There might be, it refers to the avenger of blood. Whoever that is, it could be, maybe it's a family member or something, but you killed somebody, right? And so this is a big deal, and so you have to flee. And so it says in verse 4 that the manslayer shall flee to one of these cities and shall stand at the entrance of the gate of the city and state his case in the hearing of the elders of that city. So he would explain what happened, and they shall take him into the city and give him a place so that he may dwell among them. Verse 5 actually says, now if the avenger of blood pursues him, then they shall not deliver the manslayer into his hand because he struck his neighbor. There it is. I'm not sure this is the best translation, but it does explain it for the modern world. Without premeditation. But here's another clause. And did not hate him beforehand. Right? So he didn't have the motive. He didn't hate the guy. He killed somebody he didn't intend to kill. He didn't have malice against him. And then it's verse 6, he shall dwell in that city until he stands before the congregation for judgment. This is interesting, though. Until the death of the one who is high priest in those days. Then the manslayer shall return to his own city and to his own house, to the city which he fled. So it's interesting. It doesn't say until the avenger of blood dies. It says until the high priest dies. So this is what's the purpose of this? Why is exactly it's saying this? So his case. So the manslayer's case had to be decided before the congregation, and then the high priest had to also die for him to return. Now, the commentaries have some different thoughts on this. But we can say this, I think just theologically. The high priest of the day represented the whole sacrificial system, the Levitical system. He also represented the nation's guilt. And so we get some of these concepts from Leviticus 16, the Day of Atonement. So it seems that the death of the high priest atoned in some sense for the manslayer's sin, right? And especially because it's not murder, it's manslaughter. So in some sense, it takes care of the blood in the land. And let me explain this a little more. Numbers 35, verse 25 actually speaks of it notes that the high priest is to be anointed with oil. So let's actually flip back there. Numbers 35. And you can see it's a big long section on the cities of refuge. So Numbers 35:25, the congregation shall deliver the manslayer from the hand of the blood avenger, and the congregation shall restore him to his city of refuge which he fled, and he shall live in it until the death of the high priest who was anointed with the holy oil. So there, when it's speaking of the death of the high priest, it's saying that he was anointed with the holy oil. So it seems to even speak of the high priest's death as some sort of sacrifice itself. Or it just has some atoning significance. So maybe theologically we can put it together this way. All bloodshed required death to cleanse the land. If it's murder, then your own blood, right? That's Genesis 9. He who sheds blood, by his blood shall be shed. So murder requires the death of the murderer, while manslaughter requires the death of the high priest, at least to return to your land. You have to go in these cities of refuge. So these are specially appointed cities by God for protecting manslayers. Temporarily, right? They can eventually, although I don't know, the high priest lives a long time, I guess you're in trouble. You can't leave. So let's mention where these cities are. So the Israelites set apart 3 additional cities in the hill country of the land. This is verse 7. We see that they set apart Kadesh in Galilee in the hill country of Naphtali. So that's 1. Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and Kiriath Arba, which is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah. So these are scattered throughout the land. There are 3. So if you think of Naphtali is in the northeast. So you have Naphtali, Ephraim and Judah. So basically, I don't have the exact locations here, but you're going to get one in the middle, one down here, and one up here. Okay, so that's going to be the 3 cities of refuge. And the reason there's only 3 in the land is Moses had already set apart 3 cities east of the Jordan outside the land. We see that in verse 8, where it says, beyond the Jordan, east of Jericho, they designated Bezer in the wilderness on the plain from the tribe of Reuben, and Ramoth and Gilead from the tribe of Gad, and Golan and Bashan from the tribe of Manasseh. So you had 6 cities, cities of refuge, 3 in the land and 3 east of the Jordan. And actually, we've seen in verse 9, these were appointed for Israelites or resident foreigners. This could also apply to resident foreigners in the land. Whoever kills any person unintentionally may flee there. The sons of Israel, and for the stranger who sojourns among them. I don't like that translation. I like resident foreigner better, because that's what they are. They don't have full rights. They're not citizens. You know that you can have people that live in your land that aren't citizens. You don't have to give them citizenship. This is how it works in other countries. America, I know this is a whole issue now, but biblically, I'll just at least give you the principle. It's perfectly feasible and possible to have residents who are not citizens. You can actually make those distinctions. Even biblically, they did. So I think that's a political issue. I'm not saying how you have to do it. I'm just saying it's permissible. And that's how Israel did it. So the resident foreigners did not have all of the rights of the sons of Israel. We've seen that in several passages. But they did get protection here for manslaughter. So, okay. Let's go on to chapter 21 as we finish up. We'll see. We don't have too much here. So the leaders of the Levites then come to Eleazar, Joshua, and the heads of the tribes at Shiloh. This is chapter 21, verse 1. And they ask for their land. They spoke, here's verse 2, they spoke to them at Shiloh in the land of Canaan, saying, the Lord commanded through Moses to give us cities to live in with their pasture lands for our cattle. So one thing we know is that the Levites get land, they get cities. They don't get territory, but they get cities, and they're going to be farmers of a sort, many of them at least. Of course, you need cattle. You need animals for sacrifices too, so those that had tabernacle and temple duties. Verse 3, so the sons of Israel gave the Levites from their inheritance these cities with their pasture lands according to the command of the Lord. And you have three different groups, so within the tribe of Levi. Now just note, the Levites received no land. I mentioned some of this before, so I'll just summarize it here. The Levites received no inheritance of land except 48 cities. So they get 48, so there's 48 Levite cities, and they're scattered throughout Israel. We already saw that, Genesis 49. The reason they have no inheritance of land is the Lord himself is their inheritance. The priesthood is their inheritance. The offerings by fire to the Lord are their inheritance. I'm paraphrasing other passages. Joshua 13:14, Joshua 13:33, Joshua 14, verse 3 and 4, and 18:7. I'm not going to read all those, but the Levites are guardians. I've said this before, so but I'll summarize it again. The Levites are the guardians of the Lord's worship. And so, I think theologically, the reason the Levites are scattered throughout the land is to guard the pure worship of God throughout Israel. That's the reason that that they're spread out. It's not just because they're priests. They're priests, but the Levites are warrior priests. Never forget that. I think that helps make a lot of sense when you read the Old Testament. The Levites are a class of warrior priests. And that goes all the way back to them slaughtering the Israelite idolaters back in Exodus. They're also the teachers of Israel. Let me just do a quick... there's several passages that show this, but for example, Deuteronomy 33, verse 10. The blessing of Moses. He says of the Levites, they shall teach your ordinances to Jacob and your law to Israel. They shall put incense before you and whole burnt offerings on your altar. So they're warrior priests. They're also teachers. Warrior priest teachers. I don't know. You can hyphenate all. I don't know. Whatever you want to do. But the fact is they have a duty towards the temple, but they're also teachers. In a sense, they prefigure pastors, ministers in the church today, but obviously some different duties. We don't slaughter animals. Thank God. Okay, so the Levites then have an important duty to protect the people from idolatry. When there was the golden calf incident in Exodus 32 through 34, they slaughtered, well, God told them to do it, but they killed the idolaters. They were part of those guarding the worship of God. And the same is true throughout Israel's history. The Levites should have kind of been those keeping the people in check. And so if the Levites went corrupt, and we see some of this in Judges, that's not good for Israel. And in fact, I've noticed this when you go read the prophets in the Old Testament, right? Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the 12 minor prophets. They're often rebuking the pastors of the land. They're rebuking the priests. They're rebuking even sometimes some of the prophets, false prophets and the like. So they're often directing their criticisms, God's criticism, his judgment against the Levites. So the people of Israel gave their, it says in verse 3, the people of Israel gave from their inheritance cities and pasture lands for the Levites to dwell. This was decided by Lot. We see that in verse 8. And so here's the sons of Levi. You have Kohath, Gershon, and Merari. And we looked at some of this before because, well, I won't get all that. But some of this is in the Pentateuch. So Kohath gets 23 cities. Gershon gets 13, and Merari 12. So we add them up. But part of the reasoning for this, why does Kohath get so much, is these were the sons of Aaron, therefore had special tabernacle duties. So all Levites are loosely called priests, but really it's the Kohathites that are strictly the priests. They have the priestly duties related to the tabernacle and temple. And so it makes sense that they have almost half the cities. I also noticed this, that 13 of those 23 Kohathite cities were in what became the southern kingdom, Judah, Simeon, Benjamin. So Kohathites have almost half, and 13 of those. So 13 of the 48 are in the southern kingdom. And that makes sense because Jerusalem was in Judah. So they're going to have prominence there. The Kohathites received Kiriath Arba. Verse 11 and 12 notes that Caleb had its fields and villages, but the Kohathites had the city more proper. So between these three clans, Kohathites, Gershonites, Merarites, the Levites received 48 cities. Verse 41 and 2 tells us, in the midst of the possession of the sons of Israel. So they're like Simeon, their cities are scattered, although more so because they're scattered. Simeon is scattered in Judah. Levi is scattered in all of Israel. Okay, so then let's finish up the chapter. Again, a lot of that is just the specific city, so I'm not going to read all of that. Let's read as we close here, we'll read verse 43, kind of summarizing the allotment of the land. So the Lord gave Israel all the land which he had sworn to give to their fathers, and they possessed it and lived in it. Obviously, we realize there's some exceptions. They didn't drive all the peoples out. But they have the land. It's in their possession. Verse 44, and the Lord gave them rest on every side according to all that he had sworn to their fathers, and no one of all their enemies stood before them. The Lord gave all their enemies into their hand. Now, I think that's still true. You might say, well, what about all those things? They didn't drive some of the peoples out. Yes, but they did have peace in the land. The land did have rest, at least for a time. They weren't at war with all of these peoples. Now, they failed to drive some of them out, but they did control the promised land. And then the great verse 45, not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to pass to the... Sorry. Start over. No, not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass. Literally, not one word fell. It didn't fall. It didn't fail. Is how they often translate it. But it's a great verse about the Lord's promises. God always keeps his promises, so of course. So he kept his promises. He keeps them here, and he's going to continue to keep them, even though Israel will disobey and get driven out of the land, and it's going to go pretty badly, but things will go fairly well under David for a time, and then Solomon, and then they'll go badly again, but then you have the sending of Christ, and I think we can all say that that's true, and that's a great verse to memorize, is not one word of all of the good promises of God ever fails. It always comes to pass, so we can believe his word, because he promises it, and he's God, he will keep his promises. And so that's the end of the allotment of the land. We're going to see Joshua's farewell address. There's still some really good stuff to close the book of Joshua, but that's the allotment of the land. Any final questions or thoughts before we go? I know we covered a fair amount, 4 chapters. A lot of it's territorial borders. So there's stuff tucked away there, even in the allotment of the land. So, okay. Charlie.
The cities of refuge were a type of punishment, weren't they? I mean,
yeah, I mean, you have to go away.
Free.
Yeah, that's right. You have to go away. You did shed blood. That was bad. I mentioned this. You violated the 6th commandment. You broke the 6th commandment by killing someone, even if it was accidental, as we say. Yeah, in a sense, like it's not. You can. I know we use the word accident, but it's the result of negligence. If somebody dies, it's because you didn't secure something as you ought to have, and so you didn't fulfill a duty. There's negligence. You violated the 6th commandment in a sense, even if you didn't intentionally murder someone. And so yeah, you have to go away to a city for your own safety, so that you don't get killed by the avenger of blood. And it is a punishment. So.
What about their families? Could they take their families with them?
It's a good question. I don't know.
I don't recall Scripture saying.
It doesn't say, but they probably would let them visit. I don't know if they would get to stay with them, though. It might be like it's kind of like loosely a jail or something.
Yeah.
So would it be the same thing when we're talking about inadvertently killing somebody? So you're moving boulders with other men and the boulder falls on one of your colleagues, that would be what this is speaking about. Or would it also include if you get upset with one of your colleagues for doing dumb stuff and you give him more on, you hit him on the head, and you're not trying to kill him, but then he dies.
Yeah, no, any of, yes.
Difference between these two?
Well, they're all negligence. They all are, you did something you shouldn't have done, or you should have done something to protect from the death, right? If something were to happen that was not man's fault, then that wouldn't be manslaughter. Like there are deaths that are not manslaughter, right? It could just be, there are truly accidental, I don't know, something falls from the sky and it just, somebody dies. I mean, it happens. We would call that an act of God. So, but if there's negligence involved, it's manslaughter. Yes.
As you were talking about city of refuge versus today, the city of man has those sanctuary cities.
Yeah.
Interesting how they, attempt to make a parallel.
Yeah, sanctuary cities today are sanctuaries for, it's just a fact, illegal, people illegally residing in the United States. Yeah, that's not what was going on there, right? The cities of refuge are for those who, they did commit a criminal act. It is still a crime. It's negligence. Manslaughter. But yeah, the city of refuge is to protect them because somebody else would try to kill them. So, and it's a sort of punishment.
But now, they try to make it acceptable.
Yeah. No, cities of refuge, this isn't like a good thing. Nobody's saying, oh, it's good you committed a manslaughter. No, it's not a good thing. So, anyway, maybe I'll do a whole lesson on immigration from Scripture. That'd be fascinating. Not today. All right, let's pray. Father, we do praise you that you give us your word. We praise you that you are a God who keeps your promises, that you fulfilled all of them to Israel, even though Israel didn't remain faithful to you and often didn't drive out the peoples as they were supposed to. And yet there were faithful men among them, including Joshua and Caleb, and we thank you for them and their example. Help us to be such people, we pray. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. I should have just drew that from the beginning. It wasn't so bad.
Yeah, that's right.